Have you ever noticed something like this? Two people get into a conflict. They argue, they clash, they spend weeks fighting each other. And then, when everything settles, someone else quietly walks away with the win. Not the loud ones, not the ones who are angry, not the ones who were exhausted by the fight. Someone who barely spoke. At first glance, it feels unfair, almost random, like luck. But if you've seen it happen more than once, you start to feel something else. You start to feel uneasy, because deep down, you know this wasn't random. Let me give you a situation you might recognize. A team at work starts falling apart. Two colleagues disagree on how things should be done. Meetings get tense, emails get longer, people start taking sides. From the outside, it looks messy but simple. Two people, one problem. But while everyone is watching the argument, someone else is quietly adjusting their position. They're not arguing, they're not defending themselves, they're not attacking anyone. They're just observing. And when the dust settles, guess what happens? One person gets blamed, another gets burned out, and the observer? They get the promotion, or the project, or the trust of management. And everyone else is left wondering, how did that happen? This kind of thing doesn't only happen at work. You see it in families, you see it in businesses, you see it online. Two sides fight loudly in public, comments explode, opinions harden. And while everyone is focused on the conflict itself, someone else benefits from the chaos. More attention, more control, more leverage, without ever stepping into the fight. Most people explain this away with simple answers. They were just lucky, they were more experienced, they were better connected. But those explanations don't fully satisfy us, because the pattern repeats over and over. Different people, different places, same outcome. Here's the uncomfortable truth most people don't like to admit. We're trained to watch action, not position. We focus on who's talking, who's pushing, who's reacting. We assume that the person making noise is the person making things happen. But real life doesn't work that way. In fact, the people who make the biggest moves often look like they're doing nothing at all. Think about it. When conflict breaks out, where does everyone look? At the argument, at the tension, at the explosion. Almost nobody looks at what's happening around the conflict. Almost nobody asks, who benefits if this drags on? Who loses if one side loses? Who benefits if nobody notices them? And most importantly, who doesn't need to say a word? There's a reason this feels counterintuitive. From a young age, we're taught a simple story. If you want something, you go after it. If there's a problem, you confront it. If there's a disagreement, you fight it out. Action equals control. But reality is far messier and often far quieter. Sometimes the smartest move isn't pushing forward, it's stepping back. Not out of fear, not out of weakness, but out of awareness. Because when two forces collide, they create heat, noise, and distraction. And distraction is powerful, not because it destroys things, but because it hides things. Here's the strange part. Most of the time, nobody in the conflict realizes what's happening. They're too busy proving a point, too busy defending themselves, too busy trying to win. By the time they look up, the game has already moved on, and the person who never stepped into the spotlight is already somewhere else. If this feels familiar, it's probably because you've lived it. Maybe you were one of the people arguing, maybe you were the one quietly watching, or maybe you were someone who only realized what happened afterward. That moment when you think, wait, when did things shift? That moment isn't accidental. It's the result of something most people never learn to see. This video isn't about teaching you how to manipulate people. It's not about tricks or tactics. It's about seeing the invisible dynamics that are already happening around you. Because once you notice them, you can't unsee them. And more importantly, you stop being confused by outcomes that used to feel mysterious. So before we go any further, I want you to hold on to one simple idea. The loudest conflict in the room is rarely the most important thing happening. Sometimes it's just a distraction, and sometimes the most powerful move isn't made by the people who are fighting at all. In the next part, we'll talk about why we instinctively focus on the wrong people and how that blind spot shapes almost every misunderstanding we have about power, control, and influence in everyday life. There's something almost automatic about the way we react to conflict. When tension shows up, our attention snaps to it immediately. Who's arguing? Who's raising their voice? Who's pushing hardest? We zoom in on the noise. And that feels natural because noise feels like movement. Movement feels like power. But that instinct is exactly why we miss what's actually happening. Think about the last time you saw a serious disagreement. It could be at work, it could be online, it could be between friends. Your brain probably did the same thing everyone else's did. You picked a side, or at least you formed an opinion. You thought, this person is right, that person is wrong. This is the real problem. But here's the uncomfortable part. While you were focused on the argument itself, you probably weren't paying attention to what the argument was doing. Because conflict doesn't just express tension, it creates it. It pulls attention, it consumes energy, it narrows everyone's field of vision. And once that happens, something strange occurs. The people inside the conflict become predictable. When someone is angry, they react. When someone feels threatened, they defend. When someone feels attacked, they escalate. None of this requires planning, it's instinct. And instincts are easy to anticipate, which means the people who are emotionally involved are usually the easiest to read. This is where most people get it backwards. They assume the most visible people are the most influential ones. But visibility and control are not the same thing. In fact, they often move in opposite directions. Look at any heated situation long enough and you'll notice a pattern. The louder someone becomes, the more limited their options get. They're stuck responding, stuck explaining, stuck justifying. They don't get to choose the direction anymore. They're too busy staying upright. Now contrast that with the people who are quiet. Not silent out of fear, not silent because they're powerless, but quiet because they're not emotionally entangled. They're not reacting in real time. They're not forced to respond. They have something rare in a tense situation. They have space. Space to think, space to wait, space to notice things others don't. And that space is often mistaken for passivity. People assume if they're not involved, they're not important. That assumption is costly. Here's a simple truth most of us learn too late. The people who react the least often have the most room to move. They're not pinned down by a public position. They haven't committed themselves emotionally. They haven't made promises they need to defend. Which means when the situation shifts, and it always does, they can shift with it. This is why outcomes often surprise us. From the outside, it looks like things changed suddenly, but they didn't. We just weren't watching the right layer of the situation. Most people watch the surface. They watch words, they watch actions, they watch reactions. Very few people watch structure. Who depends on whom? Who benefits if this continues? Who is protected by the system and who isn't? Those questions don't feel dramatic, so they get ignored, but they quietly decide everything. There's also another reason we misread these situations. We like simple stories. Stories with heroes and villains. Stories with clear winners and losers. Conflict fits that format perfectly. Someone must be right. Someone must be wrong. But real life doesn't care about clean narratives. It cares about incentives. People move based on pressure and reward, not moral clarity. They follow rules. They follow systems. They follow what costs them the least. And the people who understand that don't need to fight loudly. They let the structure do the work. This is why focusing only on individuals is misleading. You end up blaming the wrong people. You end up praising the wrong ones. And you end up confused when results don't match effort. Let me put it this way. When two people are locked in conflict, they're like two boxers in a ring. All their attention is on each other.
but the outcome of the fight is often decided by things outside the ring: the rules, the referee, the audience, the incentives to keep fighting or stop. And sometimes the person who understands those things best isn't throwing punches at all. Once you start seeing this, you notice it everywhere. In meetings where one person dominates the conversation, but another quietly sets the agenda. In online debates where the loudest voices burn out, while platforms quietly change the rules. In organizations where visible leaders take heat, while invisible decision-makers stay untouched. None of this means the quiet people are always good or bad. That's not the point. The point is that attention is not the same as influence, and confusing the two is how most people misunderstand power. So the next time you see a situation spiraling into conflict, try this simple mental shift. Don't ask, who's winning the argument? Ask, who is under pressure right now? Who is forced to react? Who still has room to wait? Those answers are far more revealing. In the next part, we're going to take this one step deeper, because once you stop focusing on people alone, you start noticing something even more important. Most outcomes aren't driven by people at all. They're driven by forces that don't look like forces: rules, systems, incentives. And once you see how those quietly shape behavior, a lot of things that used to feel confusing suddenly make sense.
Up to this point, we've been talking about people. Who argues? Who reacts? Who stays quiet? But here's where the picture changes. Because once you step back far enough, you start to realize something unsettling. Most outcomes are not driven by people at all. They're driven by forces. Forces that don't have faces, forces that don't speak, forces that don't care how anyone feels. Think about how often you hear explanations like this. Management decided. The company wanted. The platform changed. The system failed. Those phrases sound abstract, almost meaningless, but they point to something very real. They point to mechanisms that shape behavior without ever raising their voice. Let's take a simple example. At work, someone doesn't speak up in a meeting. It's easy to assume they're shy, or unprepared, or uninterested. But more often than not, the reason is structural. They've learned, consciously or not, that speaking up costs more than it gives. Maybe it risks their position. Maybe it threatens their manager. Maybe it puts a target on their back. So they stay quiet, not because of personality, but because of incentives. This is where most misunderstandings begin. We explain behavior through character when it's actually shaped by environment. We say they're aggressive, they're lazy, they're manipulative. But if you change the rules, you change the behavior. Every time. Now zoom out. When two people clash, they don't just collide with each other. They collide with expectations, with performance metrics, with public opinion, with timelines and deadlines. And those forces don't respond emotionally. They respond mechanically. Pressure builds where there's exposure. Protection forms where there's alignment. And the people who understand this don't need to confront anyone directly. They position themselves where the pressure isn't. Here's something most of us rarely think about. Rules don't just prevent behavior, they direct it. They create paths of least resistance. And humans, no matter how smart or principled, tend to follow the path that costs them the least. This is why outcomes often feel impersonal. Someone loses a role, not because they failed, but because the structure needed a sacrifice. Someone rises, not because they fought hardest, but because they fit the system at the right moment. It feels cold, because it is. Now think about this in moments of conflict. When emotions are high, people are exposed. They say things publicly, they take positions, they create records. That exposure interacts with systems. HR policies, platform moderation, company hierarchies, public sentiment. And once that interaction starts, no single person is fully in control anymore. This is the part most people miss. They think someone used the system, but more often the system simply did what it always does: apply pressure, reduce risk, stabilize itself.
People inside the conflict just happen to be in the way. This is why doing nothing can sometimes be the most powerful move. Not because nothing is happening, but because the forces are already moving. Deadlines approach, attention shifts, tolerance drops. Time itself becomes pressure. You don't have to push. You just have to avoid standing where the push will land. That's not manipulation. That's awareness. Once you see this, a lot of things click into place. Why the calm person often survives chaos. Why the loudest voice often disappears first. Why responsibility and blame rarely land where effort was highest. It's not fair, but it is consistent. Most people spend their energy fighting other people. Very few people learn how to read the environment. They confuse motion with progress. They confuse reaction with agency. And they underestimate how much power lies in simply not being exposed. So the question isn't, how do I control others? The real question is, where am I standing in relation to the forces at play? Because once those forces activate, they don't ask who's right, they just move. In the next part, we're going to talk about why this understanding changes how smart people behave, why they avoid certain battles, why they rarely rush in, and why staying out of the spotlight is often a deliberate choice, not a passive one.
Once you understand that outcomes are shaped by forces, not just people, certain behaviors start to make a lot more sense. Especially the behavior of people who seem calm when everyone else is reacting. At first, they can look detached, even indifferent, but that's usually a misread. Smart people don't avoid action because they're afraid. They avoid unnecessary exposure. They understand something most people don't realize until it's too late. The moment you step directly into a conflict, you give up freedom. When you speak publicly, you lock yourself into a position. When you take sides, you inherit someone else's enemies. When you act emotionally, you shorten your timeline. And once that happens, your options collapse. You're no longer choosing, you're responding. This is why experienced people hesitate before stepping into messy situations. Not because they don't care, but because they're counting the cost. And the biggest cost is rarely effort, it's commitment. Commitment ties you to outcomes you don't control. It ties your reputation to variables you can't predict. It puts you in the line of fire of systems that don't distinguish between intention and impact. Think about how many conflicts escalate not because the issue grew bigger, but because someone felt forced to defend a position they took too early. One comment leads to another. One clarification becomes a justification, and suddenly backing down feels impossible. Not because it's wrong, but because it's visible. Smart people recognize this pattern. They know that visibility amplifies pressure. The more visible you are, the more the system expects consistency from you. And consistency limits adaptation. So instead of rushing in, they often wait. They observe where the pressure is building. They watch how incentives shift. They notice who's being protected and who isn't. This waiting isn't passive, it's strategic patience, even if they never call it that. There's another reason they stay out of the spotlight. Direct involvement makes you accountable for outcomes you can't fully shape. If things go well, credit is shared. If things go wrong, blame concentrates. And blame is sticky. It doesn't care about nuance. This is why you often see capable people positioned slightly to the side, close enough to understand what's happening, far enough to avoid being pulled into the chaos. They maintain optionality, and optionality is power. Most people feel uncomfortable with this. Waiting feels like doing nothing, and doing nothing feels irresponsible. But in complex systems, restraint is often more responsible than intervention, because intervention changes the system. And once you change it, you own part of the result. This doesn't mean smart people never act. They just act differently. They choose moments where their involvement reduces noise instead of adding to it, where their presence stabilizes rather than escalates, where the system supports their move instead of resisting it. You can see this clearly in leadership. The worst leaders react to every signal.
They comment on everything. They correct everyone. They insert themselves constantly. And in doing so, they create dependence, confusion, and fatigue. Strong leaders, on the other hand, often say very little. But when they do speak, the room changes, because they've waited for the moment when their words align with the underlying forces. This applies beyond leadership, in negotiations, in personal relationships, in public discussions. Stepping back is not avoidance, it's calibration. There's also a moral misunderstanding here. People assume not stepping in is selfish, but sometimes stepping in early makes things worse. It hardens positions, it raises stakes, it forces systems to respond aggressively. Waiting can be the more ethical choice. So if you've ever felt frustrated watching someone do nothing while chaos unfolds around them, it's worth asking a different question. Are they disengaged, or are they simply refusing to sacrifice long-term flexibility for short-term visibility? Once you see it this way, a lot of behavior that used to look cold starts to look disciplined, and a lot of behavior that looked brave starts to look impulsive. In the final part, we're going to bring all of this together, not with a rule, not with a takeaway, but with a way of seeing situations that changes how you interpret conflict altogether. Because once you understand where movement really comes from, you stop being surprised by who ends up on top.
By now, this might all feel a little uncomfortable. Not because it's complicated, but because it challenges the way we're used to interpreting situations. We're trained to look for actors, for decisions, for moments where someone did something. But most of the time, that's not where the real movement happens. Once you start paying attention, you notice that many outcomes don't arrive with a clear turning point. There's no dramatic moment, no obvious winner. Things just settle. And when they do, the result feels almost inevitable in hindsight. This is why people often say things like, "It was obvious this would happen. I saw that coming." But they didn't. They just reconstructed the story after the fact. Because while the situation was unfolding, most of the signals were quiet. The truth is, we're much better at explaining outcomes than we are at noticing the forces that create them. We confuse clarity with control, and that confusion shapes how we respond to conflict. When something goes wrong, we rush to intervene. When tension appears, we feel pressure to act. When disagreement escalates, we assume choosing a side is required. But none of that is automatic. It just feels that way. Once you understand how pressure, incentives, and exposure interact, you realize that not every situation demands your presence. Some situations resolve themselves. Others burn themselves out. Some are designed, intentionally or not, to pull people in and drain them. And the ability to tell the difference is more valuable than any quick response. This doesn't mean disengaging from life. It means engaging with it more selectively, with more awareness of what actually moves things forward and what simply creates noise. Think back to situations that confused you in the past. Moments where the outcome didn't match the effort, where the loudest voices didn't win, where the calmest person somehow ended up ahead. Those moments weren't anomalies. They were clues. Clues that there's another layer beneath what we see. A layer where timing matters more than intensity, where position matters more than persuasion, where exposure shapes fate more than intention. Once you start seeing that layer, you stop being shocked by results that used to feel unfair or random. You might not like them, but you understand them. And understanding changes how you move through similar situations in the future. The goal isn't to outmaneuver anyone. The goal is to stop being confused, to stop mistaking visibility for influence, to stop mistaking reaction for control, to recognize when stepping in gives you leverage and when it quietly takes it away. So the next time you're watching a conflict unfold or feeling pulled into one yourself, pause for a moment. Not to judge, not to decide, just to observe. Ask yourself, where is the pressure actually coming from? Who is being forced to respond? Who still has the option to wait? Those questions won't tell you what to do, but they will tell you what's real.
And once you can see what's real, you don't need to rush. You don't need to prove anything. You don't need to win the moment, because you're no longer trapped inside the most obvious part of the situation. Most people live their lives reacting to the surface of things. A few learn to read what's underneath. The difference isn't intelligence, it's attention. And sometimes, the most powerful move is simply seeing clearly while everyone else is busy looking at the noise.